All right. As everyone knows, I am notorious for playing very nicely with regulators and commissioners, just top to bottom at most of the major U.S. agencies. So this one is no different. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us. I think excited for this conversation. Have been excited for this conversation pretty much since we started the event yesterday morning, because I've been spending a lot more time on the policy side, as you know. And the next 18 months are probably going to be the most transformative for crypto since we've gotten too big to ignore at this point. And I think there was a little bit of strategic ambiguity, and we got away with a lot because of the volatility of crypto. We'd be on the radar, we'd be off the radar. That's changed. It seems like crypto is top of mind for all the major 3- and 4-letter agencies in DC. It's on the top of mind for policymakers. And we've got a few different proposals between a stablecoin bill, some comprehensive legislation that might actually help people understand where the jurisdiction begins and ends for different regulatory bodies. The CFTC is, I think, the lead horse right now, hopefully, we think, for regulating the spot and derivatives markets for crypto. But I'd love to hear how you're thinking about the challenges that crypto presents to regulators in general, and where, from your position, the CFTC is going to have an advantage in not only regulating the exchanges that are responsible for facilitating these trading these assets, but ultimately maybe overseeing the networks themselves that are early on in their development. So maybe just let's start with the general breakdown of the state of play and where from your vantage point, what good regulation, good oversight will look like, not only to curb excesses, but to make sure that the U.S. maintains its lead within crypto.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Brian, for that question, and there's a lot in there, so I'm happy to unpack some of that. First of all, I have to give my standard disclaimer, which is that my views that I expressed today are just my own and not that of the CFTC or of any of the other commissioners. But look, there's a couple different reasons why the CFTC has basically been purpose-built for this kind of regulation over this kind of asset. So, first of all, the CFTC, and I think we'll just jump right into the jurisdictional question, the CFTC basically has such a broad jurisdiction over so many different kinds of products, from your traditional ag products to commodities like metals or oil to complex financial products, benchmarks, indices, all of those different things. And when you think about it, if it's not a security, then it's something that the CFTC probably has regulatory touch points over. And our experience regulating such a wide variety of really things, goods, articles, services, interests, rights, really makes us well adapted for this kind of innovation and for these kinds of assets. Besides that, we have a principles-based regulatory framework, which a lot of people talk about, like what's principles-based, what does that really mean? From my perspective, it means that we are quicker on our feet. It means that we can adapt and anticipate new risks and emerging issues more quickly. It doesn't take us such a long time to sit there and have to go through all of these really complex processes to come out with a very specific step-by-step, one-size-fits-all solution, because the fact of the matter is it's not one-size-fits-all. And so I think it's really great that we have that flexibility to come up with the right answer, the right tool, and the right solution for the right case, for the right use case. And then besides that, when you think about what the CFTC's done, I think we've shown time and time again when there's been highly volatile markets, when there's been times of market stress, the CFTC, like I said, has been quick on its feet to react to that and to make sure that we have the right safeguards and the right protections in place to fight against and protect against market conduct abuses, manipulation. Some of the biggest cases ever have been brought by the CFTC to fight fraud and manipulation in the markets, including, just recently we did one for $1.17 billion. That's a settlement for oil manipulation. There's another case that we filed for a Bitcoin Ponzi scheme that even reached, all the way into South Africa, and that was for $1.7 billion. So while I'm at it, I'll just go ahead and say I don't think anyone who says that the CFTC is a weak regulator really knows what we're about.
Well, it is a strong regulator, and actually, a former CFTC chair is now at another regulatory agency. I think within crypto, some entrepreneurs, some folks on the policy side are just so frustrated with the process that has come out of SEC leadership, that they're making kind of snap decisions or scrambling to ensure that if there is legislation that's passed, the CFTC is maintaining primary authority. But one thing that I would love to get your take on is, how do you future-proof legislation and kind of regulation so that we don't get into a scenario where just because the folks at the CFTC today might be marginally more friendly, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to translate to tomorrow. So as we think about rulemaking, as we think about kind of the rules of the road, what are some of the principles that you and your team are organizing around as you think about, regardless of which way this ultimately breaks and what gets passed, if we do see legislation, or whether it's just following some of the executive orders and going through rulemaking according to the EOs that have come out. What's most important to get right, and what is most important to tap the brakes on so that we don't strangle the industry in its infancy and over prescribe regulation that might not fit in a year, 2 years, 3 years as the industry evolves?
Yeah. So this is a great question, and you bring up some really good points there. And I think one of the things is, when you look at how we have laws and regulations in the United States, we have one body which makes the laws, right, passes legislation, and it necessarily is pretty high level because it's setting forth laws that are pretty hard to change. And these are sort of like the bedrock of our whole regulatory framework. But then you have a separate, agencies that then implement rules and go through, the hard work of really slogging through the details and the weeds and getting into the nitty-gritty of what specifically, the rules should be there. And I think that's designed to be that way, where you have Congress coming out with the policy, and you have regulators who do policy making as well, but really we're focused on these technical rules. And that's a really great division of labor and also a great partnership. So, when we think about all the different legislative proposals that are out there, I'm so pleased that Congress is taking the time to think through what's a clear and holistic regulatory framework over digital assets in the United States. Many other jurisdictions around the world have come out with that already, and I've been going around, learning from each of these jurisdictions who've had registration and licensing schemes in place since like 2019, and asking them, look, what works and what doesn't, and what are some of the things that you think have been successes in helping to foster innovation, but then where are other things where there's been some risks or some issues that maybe you've not anticipated, and how have you dealt with them? I think that's so important to get out there and to really understand that as well. When we think about what the next step could be, I think the president's executive order and the reports that have just recently come out underneath that are just so telling. As I've said all along, regulators have tools and authorities right now that we can use, while Congress is working through its process to put forth like a clear and holistic regulatory framework. And indeed, one of the Treasury reports says that regulators need to use their existing authorities to issue guidance and new rules if necessary, to provide more clarity to the industry and to the public, and then to work collaboratively. And so I could not agree more with all of that, and it's something I've been saying since the beginning.
When you do have a situation where regulators are jockeying for position, that tiebreaker should be handled in Congress. Congress is a little bit dysfunctional right now, and has been for quite some time. So it's not always clear that they're going to break the ties that they should by upgrading legislation for new instances or kind of new needs like we see with crypto today. You had a fairly remarkable statement after the SEC commented on 6 or 7 different assets as part of the Coinbase insider trading case. Basically said that they were securities without actually going to any of the projects that could defend themselves, and they kind of like wrapped it in to the Coinbase insider trading issue from earlier this summer. And you quoted the Federalist, which was great in the statement itself, but it was that's not necessarily common to see a commissioner comment on another regulator's interpretation of the rules. And people need to be able to read between the lines and see that that was kind of an exceptional case, and I think an exceptional statement. Can you just explain where this dividing line is or should be, and how this will ultimately get adjudicated between where the authority ends at the CFTC and where it begins at the SEC and vice versa. Is this going to come down sector by sector? Is it going to be, one regulator taking primary ownership and then carving out some oversight responsibilities to the other, or are we just talking about years of back and forth tug of war as people think about what's going to be the most advantageous for their career and maybe political aspirations to rein in crypto?
Yeah, so I think maybe I'll walk you through my statement and what I was thinking and why I was so fired up and what I wanted to get out there. But I think before I jump into that, look, the United States has been blessed with 7 federal financial regulators and 50 state regulators and other authorities besides. And the fact of the matter is, it's been that way for a long time. And all of the agencies have worked together to sort out their jurisdictional lines. And so this isn't anything that's really new. I mean, we've been like this for a long time, and we've dealt with crises, 2008 financial crisis with COVID and everything, and been able to do so pretty good. And the CFTC and the SEC, since the CFTC first existed in its current form, have worked together on our jurisdictional lines. We can go back to, I think, the 80s, and you had the CFTC chairman and the SEC chairman at the time worked out an accord about how to draw the line between our different products. And Dodd-Frank had the same thing, drew a line there too. And so this idea that it's a zero-sum game, it just isn't. I mean, there are products and projects that are out there, whether they're tokenized securities or whether they're some kind of project that very clearly looks like it's for capital raising purposes and would meet the Howey test and everything. So those are securities. And then there's products that are out there that are banking or payment products, and then that's something that the bank regulators are looking at. And then there's everything else, which, like I said before, the CFTC probably has some touch point over. And there's a lot of products that are out there that look like some kind of derivative or something. So that's a complex legal analysis. A lot of lawyers in the audience. That's a case by case task. And so there's plenty of room at the table, I think, for everybody, and plenty to keep everybody busy with. But when I wrote that statement and I put it out there and I went to the Federalist Papers, it's because at its heart, this to me is an issue about good government and what does it mean to live and to be part of a participatory democracy, and that the government serves the people and that we have to be responsive to the people. And you know what? We're regulators and we have to do our job, and our job is to regulate. And not only should regulators regulate, but we should be part of the solution. And so that's something I feel really strongly, especially over my career history. And that's why I went straight to the Federalist Papers. And it's like, let's remember who we serve, at the end of the day. Like, I'm here to work for each and every single one of you. That is literally my job. And so I think it's so important that I'm out there talking to people and hearing from people and how they feel, and that they feel trust and confidence in the government that it's working for them. So that's one piece of it. So the first half of my statement was about the regulation by enforcement. And I've said this before, I don't believe in any kind of gotcha enforcement. The right way to come out with new standards, rules, definitions, something that's going to affect such a huge swath of industry and the economy, is to engage in public notice and comment rulemaking under the Administrative Procedure Act, and that's the law. So that's what the first part of my statement was about. And as we discussed, it has pretty sweeping repercussions potentially for utility tokens and for DAOs. And so I just really think that that's something that the public ought to have a say in. The second half of my statement is really about the CFTC and its job and what we're supposed to do. And under the Dodd-Frank Act, the CFTC has really broad enforcement authorities against fraud and manipulation and against insider trading as well. And so I think that where we have something that touches CFTC markets and products, that we have to do our jobs. And we can't just stand there and not do anything. And so that's really what the second part of my statement was about, that we have to uphold the law to the fullest extent. We have to use all the powers available to us to do that, and to make sure that at the end of the day, we're serving the people and that justice is being done.
I think this is the first and last time that I'm ever going to pretend to defend Gary Gensler, but let me play devil's advocate for a second. There's thousands of assets now within the crypto industry. The federal regulators might be overmatched just on a pure numbers basis because of the number of projects and the lack of precedent in terms of how do we treat these assets, how do we define what's what, and where there should be oversight. Is there any merit to regulation by enforcement if you're just trying to slow down the pace of potential bad innovation, if you're a regulator that believes that there's more harm than good that's coming out of this asset class? And is there a better way? Like, what is the alternative? If you are concerned at a macro level that 90% of the projects in the space are unregistered securities and they're ultimately going to be damaging to retail investors, and there haven't been like suitability tests for individuals that are getting into this asset class. If that's your concern and you're okay with hitting the pause button on an entire industry for a few years until that is sorted out, is that okay? Or what is the better path? And can the CFTC kind of show the better path and just build some of those solutions, whether they're safe harbors or they're a regulatory sandbox? What is the right solution here, aside from passively waiting for someone who's never going to change their behavior, or passively waiting for some legislation to really definitively mark who should be regulating where?
Yeah. So regulators have a lot of different tools, and one of the most powerful tools that we have is enforcement. And the CFTC has also done regulation by enforcement, by the way. There's two ways to make rules. You can do it through a rulemaking, takes longer, or you can do it through an enforcement action or through the courts. And so the enforcement actions, that has sort of the power of guidance. And if you have something that's an actual court decision, then that, of course, has the force of law. And so when I think through what you do, well, first of all, the CFTC's been going after scams and frauds, really egregious ones, just people getting ripped off, just lies, stealing, cheating. And so that's something that the CFTC and the SEC and every other agency with enforcement authority ought to be going after and making sure that we're cleaning things up and putting people on notice that you can't be ripping people off. But I do find that a lot of the people that come in and engage with us and talk to us, they're trying to be responsible. They're legitimately trying to grow a business. It's not a very good business if all of a sudden you're doing something illegal and you lose all of your, your investors, or you get shut down, or you lose your licenses or your registration if you have that. So for the most part, people who are trying to be responsible, they are trying to do the right thing, and it just makes good business sense. When it comes to the question about, what do you do to try to protect the most people? I think that's where you go after the areas where there is just the most blatant kind of wrongdoing. And you make it clear that people just can't be getting away with that kind of thing. I mean, just today, the CFTC brought some cases against 5 entities that were unregistered futures commission merchants, including some that were doing binary options and crypto and some other things, and just showing that, look, failure to register is absolutely a violation of our rules, and we will come and bring enforcement actions against you for that.
Zooming out, we're going to have a change of control in Congress, most likely, I guess, in the next couple of months, but we still have several years of the current leadership at both the CFTC and SEC, so, the only change that we're really going to see in terms of the personnel might be at the congressional side. Where do you think how do you think this ultimately gets resolved in the next 18 months? We're going through a period of consolidation within crypto. We're in the bear cycle, and historically it's been 4 years, and now we have the macro backdrop that's a little bit more negative, so maybe this takes a little bit more time to build our way out. There will be time to get this right. What do you think is a good outcome for the industry, for consumers, and ultimately for this stalemate that might exist between the CFTC and SEC in terms of oversight of the market?
Yeah. So I think in the near term, the soonest you're going to see clarity, and from what source are you going to see that? I think that's going to be the courts. I think that's where you're going to see the most definitive clarity. Mm-hmm. After that, look, it's what I've been saying, actually when we sat down and started this, we as regulators have been given by Congress a mandate and incredibly broad and flexible powers to achieve that mandate. And so we should be issuing guidance, and we should be issuing new rules as necessary. And that's something that you can do through different mechanisms that don't take 2 years, for example, right? And so I really do think it's incumbent upon the regulators to use the existing tools and authorities that they have to protect against the risks and the fraud and the abuses that we've seen. But even besides that, we could just have public roundtables like Commissioner Peirce and I called for in our op-ed, and just invite in the industry and the experts to do an open meeting and to sit there and talk really honestly about some of the risks that we've seen in the crypto crash and all of those things, and what we can do all together to address it.
There is, I'll end with one anecdote that everybody will be familiar with. There is a certain commissioner or certain regulator that is fond of saying things like, come in, talk to us. And I would flip it around and I'd say, regulators, DC folks, politicos, when you're learning about the industry, come in, talk to us. We have the right people in the room. And thank you very much for being one of the thoughtful, curious, and ultimately proactive, and I think effective champions for smart policy in the U.S. Not champion for crypto per se, but smart policy that's going to get us in the right direction. So, Commissioner Pham, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
If we give her a hand. That was
Thanks
excellent.
so much. Thank
you very much.
Great.